Chapter 14. The Battlefields of a Dragon. This place was never built for conversation. It was built for impact. The battlefields of Danny's mind stretch on for miles, torn earth, trenches carved deep, the ground permanently scarred by what has already happened. This is not where internal doubt argues with itself. This is not where ideas are tested gently or truths negotiated. This is where the outside world collides with the dragon at speed. These are the wars that came from elsewhere: blunt force, aggression, disrespect, threat, when people don't knock, when they don't speak, when they charge. This is where they land. The air here is thick with memory, not sentimental memory, but muscle memory. The kind your body remembers before your mind does, the smell of scorched earth, the weight in the chest before a confrontation, the instant calculation, fight or annihilation. There is no maze yet, no court, no tavern wit, no garden reflection. Only response. Broken chess pieces lie half buried in the mud, scattered as far as the eye can see. Reminders of games that were never games to begin with. Pawns crushed first. Knights fall in mid-charge. Bishops split where conviction met force. These weren't debates. These were collisions. Situations where intelligence alone wasn't enough, where respect wasn't offered, where the only language spoken was pressure. And Danny comes here deliberately. Not to relive the fights, but to remember the cost. Because this is where the scars live. This is where the truth of what happened is kept intact, unpolished, unsoftened. No revision, no reinterpretation. No mercy edits for the sake of comfort. When Danny walks these fields, he does it to remind himself why certain doors closed forever, why some names never reach the maze, why some voices never earned conversation. Some people didn't want peace. They wanted domination. And those conflicts, the ones that mattered, are embedded here. The emotions that inhabit this place are not subtle. They don't whisper. They don't ask permission. Here stand anger, rage, fear, terror, defiance, wrath. Not as chaos, but as mobilized forces. These emotions are not flaws here. They are tools. They form ranks. They sharpen edges. They remember exactly what line was crossed and why. But this battlefield is not mindless brutality. This is dragon ground. Capricorn stone beneath fire. Strength alone isn't enough to survive here. Discipline is required. Control, endurance. The ability to keep swinging when the lungs burn and the outcome is uncertain. The dragon does not fight for pleasure. He fights for preservation, for boundaries, for the right to exist without being consumed by external force. And still, not every enemy can be destroyed. Some conflicts carve too deep. Some losses are too big. Some aggressions create things that do not die easily. From the fallout of certain wars, beasts emerge, not metaphors, but living consequences. Trauma, paranoia, hypervigilance, rage that no longer knows where to aim. These monsters are not born inside the dragon. They are created by impact. When they cannot be slain here, when fire and steel are not enough, they are subdued, broken down, exhausted, dragged inch by inch away from the open ground. Not forgotten, not forgiven, contained. But that comes later. The dungeons are not today. Today is about the call to arms, because this is the place Danny also comes to remember something else. How dangerous he is. Not recklessly, not cruelly, but accurately. This battlefield reminds him that when peace fails, when language fails, when boundaries are violated, the dragon does not fold. He does not freeze. He does not disappear. He responds with everything he has. Past selves stand here shoulder to shoulder. Old versions, wounded versions, hardened versions. Each one forged in a different war, each one carrying knowledge earned the hard way. Not one of them eager, but all of them ready. No single general commands them. Rage does not rule alone. Fury is not unchecked. This is a coalition of survival instincts, sharpened by time, governed by one law. If you come swinging, you'd better come prepared, because the dragon will not go down quietly. The battlefield exists to keep the rest of the fortress clean. It absorbs the violence so the maze can remain intelligent, so the court can remain just, so the garden can remain safe. It is not a place of pride. It is a place of necessity. And when Danny leaves it, boots heavy with mud, lungs full of smoke, he does not glorify what happened here. He simply acknowledges it. I survived this. I learned from this. And this will never be allowed inside unchecked. The battlefields do not exist because Danny seeks war. They exist because the world sometimes brings it anyway. And the dragon, Capricorn, fractured mind and all, refuses to be unprepared. And here is the part most people miss. Not all battlefields are remembered just because they exist. Some of them lie quiet, buried under time, adrenaline, survival, and forward motion. Danny doesn't always remember these places until he walks them again. Because when you're in the fight, you don't archive lessons. You endure. You move. You survive. You respond. The dragon does not stop mid-war to journal, so some battlefields fade into the background of the mind fortress. Not erased, just unvisited. And then years later, something pulls him back. A smell, a phrase, a tone of voice, a familiar pressure in the chest, and suddenly he's walking those miles of torn earth again. That's when the battlefield changes. The fire has cooled, the bodies are still there, but they no longer scream. The noise has gone, and now the scavengers come. Not enemies, but meaning. Vultures circle overhead, patient and impartial. They don't judge the battle. They don't care who was right. They strip it down to essentials: bone, cause, effect, consequence. This is where clarity lives. This is where emotions like empathy, regret, understanding, acceptance, and even forgiveness quietly emerge, not as weakness, but as information. They pick through what remains and ask the questions that couldn't be asked at the time. What actually started this? What did I protect? What did I lose that mattered? What was never mine to carry? Danny comes here in reflection, not rage. He walks the trenches slowly. He notices things he couldn't see before. Moments where fear masqueraded as anger. Moments where pride stood in for hurt. Moments where survival demanded force, and moments where force went further than it needed to. This is not self-flagellation. This is integration. Because the battlefield doesn't just store violence, it stores truth. Raw, unfiltered truth that hasn't been revised by time or politeness. And when Danny stands here calmly, no longer under attack, that truth becomes usable. Lessons rise out of the soil like old artifacts. Some bring closure. Some bring compassion, even for the enemy. Some bring a quiet, sobering realization this never needed to happen again. And sometimes, rarely, the battlefield gives him permission to let go, to stop carrying the weight of a war that ended years ago, to lay down armor that no longer fits, to walk away knowing he survived, learned, and doesn't need to prove it again. This is why the battlefield exists, not just to fight, but to remember accurately, because a dragon who forgets his wars becomes reckless, and a dragon who never revisits them never truly grows. Only by walking these grounds again, when the fire is gone, does Danny extract the final lesson. Strength isn't just measured by how hard you can swing. Sometimes it's measured by how honestly you can look at what's left behind and still choose not to repeat it. And there's another truth the battlefield holds, one people are often too uncomfortable to admit. Not every battle was a mistake. Some of them were necessary, some of them were just, some of them were won because they had to be. Danny comes back to certain fields not to apologize, but to confirm, to stand there again and ask the question that matters more than any regret. Did I do the right thing? Because a dragon Capricorn doesn't lash out blindly. When the call to arms is made, it is made after thresholds are crossed, boundaries ignored, warnings dismissed, respect violated. And sometimes when Danny walks these grounds in hindsight, the answer is clear. Yes, this was self-defense. This was protection. This was the moment where standing down would have meant erasing himself. On these battlefields, confidence lives alongside restraint. So does pride, not the hollow ego-fed kind, but the solid kind that comes from knowing you did not abandon your values under pressure. The fallen knights here aren't all villains. Some are simply consequences, broken alliances, burned bridges that could not be crossed safely again, lines that were drawn because nothing else worked. And that validation matters, because without it, reflection turns into self-doubt, and self-doubt is a slow poison for a dragon. This is where the battlefield gives Danny permission to say, I did not go looking for this, but I finished it, and I would do it again if I had to. That knowledge stabilizes the rest of the fortress. It tells the war council when to stand down. It tells the maze when not to open. It tells the garden it is safe to grow again. Without this reckoning, every conflict would linger unfinished, a ghost war, bleeding into places it doesn't belong. So sometimes Danny leaves the battlefield with empathy, sometimes with grief, and sometimes with something just as important, peace of conscience. Because strength isn't only proven by mercy, Sometimes strength is proven by knowing, without flinching, that the fire you unleashed was righteous, measured, and exactly what the moment required. At its core, this place is about respect, not politeness, not charm, not saying the right things, respect. Because when someone comes over that hill, whether they arrive alone or carrying an army of opinions, expectations, demands, or intent, the fortress feels it. The mind fortress notices. The inhabitants notice. And the sun notices first. The moment that light falls on them, the question isn't who are you? It's how are you entering? Everyone who approaches is routed here first, not as punishment, as assessment. They have to walk the ground. They have to see the wreckage. They have to smell the smoke, step around the bones of past conflicts, and understand without being told, this place has been defended before. If they walk carefully, if they acknowledge what they're standing on, if they show awareness, humility, intelligence, then the battlefield doesn't rise up against them. It lets them pass. That's when the path to the maze opens, because conversation is earned. But if they scoff at the scars, if they challenge the terrain instead of reading it, if they come in hostile, entitled, dismissive, or hungry for dominance, then the field answers them, not with words, with force. That's when banners lift. That's when armor moves. That's when the past self step forward, not angry, not emotional, but ready. This isn't cruelty. It's boundary physics. A dragon Capricorn does not negotiate with disrespect. Disrespect is not misunderstood. It is recognized. And the battlefield exists so that the rest of the fortress doesn't have to absorb that damage. So yes, this place is brutal, but it is also fair. It does not attack first. It responds. And everyone who survives the crossing understands something important. If you made it through without bloodshed, it wasn't because you were strong. It was because you were worthy of being spoken to next. And there's another truth that can't be softened or dressed up. If you come to this battlefield, you're not just facing history. You're coming up against the raw traits of a dragon. And dragons are not gentle creatures at the perimeter. They are egotistical. They are pompous. They are arrogant. They are territorial. They take up space and they do not apologize for it. That isn't posturing. It's nature. Because the king of this mind fortress does not sit back in a throne room, detached, watching soldiers fall while he remains untouched. He is there, on the front line, ego at his side, arrogance at his shoulder, pride in his spine, wrath in his lungs. Those traits aren't flaws in this place. They're armor. And if you've ever wondered why a dragon can feel hostile, combative, or overwhelming from the outside, this is why. You are not meeting diplomacy first. You are meeting presence. The ego you feel isn't insecurity, it's mass. The arrogance isn't vanity, it's gravity. The hostility isn't cruelty, it's readiness. A dragon doesn't wait to be tested. He is the test. So when someone bristles, feels challenged, feels smaller, feels provoked just by standing there, that reaction is information. It tells the fortress exactly how that person relates to power, to confidence, to confrontation. Some shrink, some posture, some swing. And that choice decides whether this becomes a walk through scorched earth or the last battlefield they ever step onto. Because if you're going to engage a dragon at the gates, you'd better understand one thing clearly. He's not defending from fear. He's defending because everything behind him is worth protecting. And that's what this place truly is about. Protection, not dominance, not cruelty, not a thirst for conflict. Protection. This battlefield exists to make sure that no one gets in far enough to do permanent damage, not to the structure, not to the memories, not to the architecture that holds everything else together. Because inside this fortress isn't just thought. Inside is memory. Inside is identity. Inside is history, grief, love, learning, and meaning. And inside are other people. This battlefield protects the privacy of relationships, the quiet truths shared in confidence, the things friends entrust and never expect to be weaponized. It guards the unseen agreements, the unsaid understandings, the fragile human details that only survive in safety. It protects his children, not just their bodies, but their personalities, their innocence, their becoming. It keeps their presence pure, uncorrupted by adult conflict, outside projection, or borrowed chaos. Their laughter, their questions, their evolving selves don't belong to the world's scrutiny, and they will never be offered up as collateral. There is information here, context, history, knowledge, that, in the wrong hands, would cause far more harm than good. Not because it's sinister, but because truth without wisdom becomes a weapon. Danny knows that some things, if exposed too early, too casually, or to the wrong person, don't resolve conflict. They multiply it. So the system protects the system. This is a 360-degree defense. Trenches, scorched earth, overlapping lines of fire. There are no blind spots, no soft edges, no polite entrances. This battlefield was engineered specifically for carnage, chaos, and calamity, because that's what stops intrusion before it becomes infection. If someone comes with force, they meet force. If someone comes with contempt, they meet fire. If someone comes intending to extract, manipulate, or weaponize what's inside, they never get past this ground. And this is why dragons and Danny can come across as aggressive, why they can feel rageful, why they seem hostile before a single real conversation has even begun. That anger is skin deep, surface level, environmental. It's the battlefield speaking. You're not seeing who he is, you're seeing where you are. This is the outermost layer, the place you reach before language, before nuance, before trust, before the linguistical maze even exists for you. If you can't survive the presence of the battlefield, if you can't respect the scars, the silence, the wreckage, you were never meant to reach the conversation. And that's not punishment. That's design. By design, and by absolute necessity, this system does not wait for Danny's external awareness. On the outside, Danny is often present in reality. He's standing there, listening, responding, engaging. He's not consciously sitting on a throne deciding outcomes or declaring wars. He isn't strategizing in words or weighing moral options in real time. That's the point. While Danny is moving through the external world, speaking, reacting, existing, the throne room, the battlefield, the council are already in motion inside his head. Not as a conscious choice, but as a parallel process, a background system that never shuts off. So when chaos hits, when someone comes in hot, hostile, disrespectful, manipulative, or invasive, Danny experiences it as a present moment, a flash, a surge, a tightening of the air. But inside, everything has already been triggered. The call to arms is sounded, the battlefield activates, the council aligns, the sun registers the frequency, and all of it happens faster than language. That's why, from the outside, it looks instantaneous, reactive, sudden. People assume a decision was made in the moment, that Danny chose escalation, chose aggression, chose conflict. But what actually happened is this. The system responded before Danny had time to interpret what was happening. This is not opinion-driven. It is not ego-driven. It is not a mood swing. It is a defensive reflex engineered over a lifetime. Danny doesn't consciously instruct it. He doesn't override it mid-flow. In fact, most of the time, he doesn't even realize what has just happened until later, until he returns here to the battlefield and sees the damage. That's when reflection begins. That's when he walks the scorched ground, notices new wreckage, recognizes names in the fallen, and realizes a war took place while he was still standing in the world, trying to function. Because this system does not respond to Danny's wishes. It responds to vibration, to frequency, to the emotional and energetic environment approaching the gates. Threat doesn't need to be spoken. Disrespect doesn't need to be intentional. Invasion doesn't need to be conscious. If the frequency registers as dangerous, destabilizing, or corrosive to what lies inside, the system acts immediately. And that's why people who don't understand it feel blindsided. They think they crossed the line by accident. They think Danny overreacted. They think there must have been another option. But from the system's perspective, there wasn't. Because pausing to explain, negotiate, or clarify would mean allowing the threat closer. Closer to memory, to relationships, to children, to private bonds, to fragile internal architecture that cannot afford to be misused or misunderstood. So the battlefield takes the hit. Only later does Danny return, not as a general issuing commands, but as a witness, a survivor, a strategist reviewing aftermath, asking questions the system couldn't afford to ask in the moment. And sometimes the answers bring validation, sometimes remorse, sometimes empathy, sometimes clarity. But the order never changes. Protection first, awareness later. Because if this system waited for conscious permission every time, the fortress wouldn't exist anymore. And neither would the man inside it. And this is where it needs to be said plainly, without lingering on it. The battlefield exists for one reason: to absorb conflict and violence so nothing inside has to. Those who have already met Danny on the outside, met the hostility, the sharp edges, the surface aggression, they've already stepped onto this ground. Whether they realize it or not, they've faced the first test. But the battlefield is not the gate. Winning a clash doesn't grant access. After the dust settles, the Crimson Court decides. Not consciously, not ceremonially, subconsciously, automatically. The court decides whether what approached is even allowed near the maze. If the answer is no, the journey ends here. If the answer is yes, then, and only then, the maze opens. And even surviving the maze doesn't mean entry. Beyond the maze is the gate. Beyond the gate is the tower. And only after passing all of it does someone earn a place inside. Even then, their position in the tower is assigned by the court, not by Danny's conscious preference, not by history, not by effort alone, by alignment, by frequency, by what they actually are when all masks are stripped away. That's why those already in the tower have passed the tests, and that's also why the ones who live deepest inside, his children, the bonds that matter, the parts that cannot be risked, are being protected on two fronts, from the outside world and from that side of Danny himself, because the battlefield doesn't just keep others out, it keeps the dragon from bringing war home. And even here, especially here, the moon is present. The sun scorches these battlefields. It exposes, it burns, it illuminates every scar, every crater, every fallen standard, so nothing can be denied. But the moon's glow falls differently. It doesn't flood the battlefield. It rests on it, a pale wash over torn earth and broken steel. A silver light that doesn't judge, doesn't recoil, doesn't demand explanations. And within that light, the lunar ghost wanders. Not through the battlefield as something trying to survive it, but amongst it, as if it were neutral ground. And the echo rings here too. Low, constant, familiar. This is important because this is the only place where Danny can clearly see the distinction. Anyone Danny meets on the external who ends up engaging him here, who turns conflict into trauma, who escalates into scorched earth, who weaponizes rage, jealousy, or fear, that person was never meant to go any further. If it ends on the battlefield, it ends for a reason. Because the lunar ghost does not resolve things like this. She doesn't arrive with armies. She doesn't provoke war. She doesn't turn disagreement into carnage. There may still be conflict. There may still be arguments. There may still be moments of friction, but they don't leave bodies behind. They don't create monsters. They don't scar the land. The battlefield would never be where she is met. And yet, this is the paradox. She is perfectly capable of walking it. She can stand there amongst the wreckage, see the dragon fire, see the fury, see the jealousy, the wrath, the rage, the ugly, violent shitstorm of it all. And it doesn't move her an inch, because the war isn't aimed at her, because she isn't threatened by it. She doesn't flinch at the sound of armor clashing or recoil at the smell of smoke. She doesn't demand the battlefield be erased before she'll step onto it. She doesn't ask Danny to pretend it doesn't exist. She just walks beside him, not as a cheerleader, not as a fixer, not as a judge or a savior, but side by side. She hears every story, knows every fact, understands every reason why those wars were fought and why some of them had to be. She sees the strength and the danger, the protection and the cost, and none of it changes her stance. The moonlight doesn't weaken the battlefield. It softens its edges. It turns carnage into context. It makes room for understanding without excusing harm. It allows the dragon to remain a dragon without becoming a monster. That's how Danny knows, not by absence of conflict, not by false peace, but by presence. The one who can stand in the middle of his wars, knowing everything, seeing everything, and still choose him anyway, not despite the battlefield, but without ever needing to fight on it. When the moon washes over Dragonfire, it does not try to extinguish it. She is not rain. She is not suppression. She is water by nature, yes, but water that knows fire. Water that understands heat, pressure, and force. She cools without shaming. She tempers without diminishing. She is balance. Where the battlefield was scorched into survival, she turns it into meaning. Because when the lunar ghost steps fully onto that ground, this is no longer just an echo wandering amongst ruins. This is something older, something truer. She is ferociously protective of her son, not in possession, not in control, but in certainty, in knowing, in anchoring. And the sun, in return, is ferociously protective of her, not in dominance, not in ownership, but in reverence. This is important because the fire that rises when she is present is not dragon fire. It is not the fire of war, not rage, not wrath, not destruction. It is the fire that burns inside the sun itself, the fire that creates rather than consumes, the fire that sustains worlds, the fire that gives life its momentum. When the lunar ghost comes down onto the battlefield, she doesn't arrive as something to be defended by the fire. She becomes the reason the fire exists at all, not to burn enemies, not to protect territory, but to keep existence warm, to keep the system alive. The dragon does not fight for her in the way he fights wars. He fights because of her, because she turns survival into purpose, because she transforms chaos into direction, because she gives the sun something to burn toward, not just against. And that is the difference between a dragon that wages endless war and a dragon that finally understands why he has fire in the first place. The battlefield doesn't disappear under moonlight. It becomes sacred ground. And when the lunar ghost sees Dany's scars, she isn't repelled by them. She isn't disgusted. She isn't afraid. She sees them for exactly what they are. Proof. History written into skin. Evidence of survival. Marks earned in battles that had to be fought. She doesn't ask how they happened. She doesn't wish they weren't there. She doesn't need them explained. She simply steps closer. She traces them with understanding, with tenderness, with recognition. And where others would turn away, she kisses them. Not to heal them. They don't need healing, but to honor them. She loves him with the scars, not in spite of them, because to her, they are not damage. They are the places where the dragon chose to keep living. And this is where the echo matters, because the echo that moves through these battlefields is not random noise. It isn't fantasy. It isn't madness. It is Dany's reasoning, reverberating back at him. The echo carries the same war cries, the same justifications, the same boundaries, the same moment when a line was crossed and could not be uncrossed. When Dany goes to war, the echo goes with him. When he stands his ground, it stands too. When he howls at the moon, the echo howls back, not louder, not softer, but in tune. For a relationship to survive this terrain, the echo must resonate with the original. The reflection must match, not just in love, but in conviction. Not just in tenderness, but in principle. Not just in peace, but in the reasons why peace was defended. She doesn't question why the battle was fought. She already knows. She doesn't try to silence the war cry. She calls back with her own. She doesn't flinch at the moment Dany chose to fight instead of fold, because her echo would have risen at the same time. That's the alignment. Same instincts, same thresholds, same understanding of when to fight and when not to. And that's why the lunar ghost can stand there in the middle of his wars unmoved, because the echo that lives in her matches his own. Not louder, not softer, not opposing, just true. And in that resonance, scars kissed, battles understood, reasons shared, the dragon is no longer alone on the field. And this is where it all settles into something recognizable. Not myth, not poetry, not fantasy, but psychology. A dragon Capricorn does not process threat the way most people do. Capricorn builds systems. Dragon defends territory. Dragon twice over does it instinctively. The battlefield exists because it has to. For Dany, conflict is not something that slowly escalates through conversation when respect is absent. It activates immediately. Not out of malice, not out of cruelty, but out of pattern recognition, vibration, frequency, environmental read. If something approaches with blunt force, disrespect, dominance, or intention to destabilize, the system doesn't ask what it wants. It meets it. That's dragon psychology. Dragons don't posture and wait to be struck. They stand in the open, make themselves visible, and say, if this is war, then let it be war. That alone filters most people out. The battlefield does its job before a single word is spoken. Capricorn is the reason this battlefield isn't chaos for chaos' sake. It's structured, layered, purpose-built. Every scar has context. Every conflict is cataloged. Every war is remembered not for glory, but for what it taught. Capricorn returns to the battlefield not to relive the fight, but to audit it, to confirm whether the response was justified, necessary, proportional. Was this self-defense? Was this protection? Was this earned? If yes, it stays etched into the land as validation. If no, it becomes a lesson carved into stone so it never happens the same way again. That's why Dany revisits these places, not to feed rage, but to contain it. And schizophrenia doesn't break this system, it explains it. Because when the mind experiences the world as overwhelming, intrusive, and unsafe, it doesn't build open plan spaces. It builds fortifications. It externalizes threat so it can be managed somewhere other than the self. The battlefield holds everything that never made it to dialogue, everything that never made it to understanding, everything that arrived as force. It keeps those things out there so the inside can remain intact. That's why Danny can seem aggressive on the surface. You're not meeting the man, you're meeting the perimeter. And once you understand that, truly understand it, the battlefield stops looking like violence and starts looking like discipline. It is not where Danny lives, it is where he protects.